Well, thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the event hosts here at Powell's Books. And before we begin, I want to encourage you to check out our lineup of upcoming virtual events by visiting our website at powells.com. If you don't already do so, please follow us on our social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as our YouTube channel. Tonight, we're honored to welcome Jessamine Chan in conversation with Rachel Yoder. Chan's debut novel, The School for Good Mothers, is a searing page-turner that is also a transgressive novel of ideas about the perils of a perfect, quote unquote, upper middle class parenting, the violence enacted upon women by both the state and at times one another. It's also about the systems that separate families and the boundlessness of love, as it introduces us to Frida Liu and struggling every woman for the ages. She doesn't have a career worthy of her Chinese immigrant's parents' sacrifices, and she can't persuade her husband Gust to give up his wellness-obsessed younger mistress. Only with Harriet, their cherubic daughter, does Frida finally attain the perfection expected of her. Harriet may be all she has, but she is just enough, until Frida has a very bad day. Because of one moment of poor judgment, a host of government officials will now determine if Frida is a candidate for a big brother-like institution that measures the success or failure of a mother's devotion. Faced with the possibility of losing Harriet, Frida must prove that a bad mother can be redeemed and that she can learn to be good. Jessamine is joining us tonight from Chicago. Jessamine's joined in conversation by Rachel Yoder, author of Nightbitch, which Carmen Maria Machado calls, quote, a feral, unholy marriage of Tilly Olsen and Kafka. And Kevin Wilson calls it, quote, magical, dark, and funny. Rachel's joining us tonight from Iowa City, Iowa. This evening's event also includes a Q&A. Please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question at any time. And if someone else has typed a question that you'd like to know the answer to, you can even upvote that particular question. Perhaps most importantly, please support our authors and Powell's by purchasing a copy of The School for Good Mothers. Tonight, a link to buy the book will be shared in the chat this evening, as well as a link to buy Rachel's books a couple of times this evening. Without any further ado, please welcome Jessamine Chan and Rachel Yoder. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, how's it going? Big day, huh?
It's quite cold here. I'm sure it's also very chilly in Iowa City.
It is, as you were talking about your space heater and the chilliness. I'm wearing sweatpants underneath my dress, as is the way of the Midwest. So I'm with you. So are you gonna start us off by reading a little bit from the book?
I'm going to read just a quick two-page section from pretty early on in chapter 1. So it's my first time reading from the actual copy, which is very exciting. So I'm going to read from just page 13 and 14. Tonight, again, Frida can't sleep. She needs to tell the family court judge that Harriet was not abused, was not neglected, that her mother just had one very bad day. She needs to ask the judge if he's ever had a bad day. On her bad day, she needed to get out of the house of her mind, trapped in the house of the body, trapped in the house where Harriet sat in her exercise with a dish of animal crackers. Gust used to explain the whole world that way. The mind as a house, living in the house of the body, living in the house of a house, living in the larger house of the town, in the larger house of the state, in the houses of America and society and the universe. He said these houses fit inside one another like the Russian nesting dolls they bought for Harriet. What she can't explain, what she doesn't want to admit, what she's not sure she remembers correctly. How she felt a sudden pleasure when she shut the door and got in the car that took her away from her mind and body and house and child. She hurried away when Harriet wasn't looking. She wonders now if that wasn't like shooting someone in the back, the least fair thing she's ever done. She bought an iced latte at the coffee shop down the block, then walked to her car. She swore she'd come home right away. But the 10-minute coffee run turned into 30, which turned into an hour, which turned into 2, then 2.5. The pleasure of the drive propelled her. It wasn't the pleasure of sex or love or sunsets, the pleasure of forgetting her body, her life. At 1 a.m., she gets out of bed. She hasn't cleaned in 3 weeks. Can't believe the police saw her house this way. She picks up Harriet's toys, empties the recycling, vacuums her rugs, starts a load of laundry, cleans the soiled extra saucer, ashamed she didn't clean it earlier. She cleans until 5, becoming lightheaded from the disinfectants and bleach. The sinks are scrubbed, the tub is scrubbed, the hardwood floors are mopped. The police aren't here to notice her clean stovetop. They can't see that her toilet bowl is pristine, that Harriet's clothes have been folded and put away, that the half-empty takeout containers have been discarded, that there's no longer dust on every surface. But as long as she keeps moving, she won't have to go to sleep without Harriet, won't expect to hear her calling. She rests on her clean floor, her hair and nightshirt soaked with sweat, chilled by the breeze from the back door. Usually if she can't sleep and Harriet is here, she retrieves Harriet from her crib and holds her while Harriet sleeps on her shoulder. Her sweet girl. She misses her daughter's weight and warmth.
Thank you for your beautiful prose that just feels so effortless throughout the entire book. This whole book, I was so astounded reading through it it felt like the work, not of a debut author, of someone who like very confidently knew how to be a novelist. So congratulations on imbuing it with that sense of confidence. But maybe we can just begin where you began in this moment, right? Frida's very bad day. She has an 18-month-old and has left her in a sort of little exercise thing in which we put our children so they don't go all over the place for a number of hours. She thinks it's just going to be a few moments, turns into something longer. As a mother myself, one can certainly relate with, having a bad day and just wanting some time to yourself, just wanting a moment away. And on a very bad day, your mind can be stretched to like imagining, oh, well, what if I just left for a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about, because this moment is so central to like the whole plot of the book, can you talk a little bit about deciding what exactly, her very bad day would look like and how you wanted that to sort of affect your readers, what you wanted it to bring up in your readers? Because I could see some readers being like, oh yeah, like, I can totally understand this happening. I can see other readers being like, this is absolutely, irresponsible and uncalled for. Like, did you want it to kind of be in a gray area, or were you pushing it sort of to one side or another? If you could just talk a little bit about your thinking and crafting of that first incident.
Well, first of all, thank you for the description of my prose of my dreams. So thank you so much for that. It's the funny thing about talking about the book now that it's out, and also in doing pre-pub, is to put intention and a narrative over something that was mostly like decisions made by gut instinct and what I felt like doing. So if one were to put a narrative on the way I made decisions here, I think I was hoping to have an Asian American heroine who was truly flawed. And I think that was important for the project as a whole, and which I didn't dare call a book for a while. And I think there was a suggestion made, like I brought versions of the story version of this to the Bread Loaf Conference, which has been very instrumental in this book's life. And I brought versions of the story there, and there were definitely a lot of people around the workshop table who suggested having Frida do something much more innocent, like leaving her child in the car and running in to get her wallet off the counter of dry cleaners or something.
Right.
or like doing something truly, truly innocent, so that it would be a narrative of an innocent person fighting against the state. And for whatever reason, that story just didn't interest me. Like I was interested in having the story be about someone who did something truly selfish and dangerous and then had to reckon with that. So one of the initial sparks, besides my complete freaking out about having a baby and that being a driver of the story, was I had read an article in the New Yorker by Rachel Yoder called "Where Is Your Mother?", which was about a single mom who left her toddler son at home, and after that day never got him back. And it was about her tragic Kafka-esque nightmare with the family court system. And so I was really fascinated by the idea that you could do something very quickly that could completely change your life and your family's life. So I think that moral gray area was really interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're framing a story that is absolutely terrifying, and I think so many parents are terrified of, right? That there is this sense that you're always being watched as a parent, and always being judged to a certain extent. And if you do have a very bad day, you better hope no one's around to see it, right? Because, yeah, well, I mean, I have so many questions from what you just said, but you did mention that you workshop this at Bread Loaf. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, and then you also mentioned that sort of what was it? Did you say your terror of having a child? That might not be the right word, but
no, my consuming anxiety.
Anxiety. Okay, yes.
Whether or not to have a baby definitely drove the creation of this book.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about when you started writing, when that was, and what sort of the impetus was, and then how it came to be? Like, when did you start writing this, and where did it come from?
Well, the funny thing is that Frida's very bad day came from a very good writing day, because I was working on short stories, and it was early 2014. I had another round of not getting into MacDowell and Yaddo and all the residencies, which I've been rejected from many times. And instead, I asked a dear friend of mine who had a house upstate if I could go hang out at her house by myself and use all my vacation days and just be there alone and write. And I was snowed in, and I was—
Sounds amazing. Yeah.
I can't really imagine doing anything like that now. So I'm glad I had that experience then. Yeah. And I was coming up with one terrible short story idea after another. And while I was just throwing ideas against the wall and seeing what would stick, I had a really good, inspired day. And I wrote like in a trance, the kind of day you dream of having. So most writing days, I do not sit down and come up with the idea for a really complicated novel. Whatever happened in my brain that day was very lucky. So some of the things happening in my life was that I was heading into my late 30s, and it was time, biological clockwise, to choose a path with having a baby or not having a baby. And so that pressure really weighed on me. And I had read this New Yorker article a couple months earlier, and something about it just stuck in my mind. So I'm going to make it sound like it emerged as if from magic, but it, like, I can just tell you that this never happens to me, and it took years and years to take that good idea and turn it into a book. But what happened was I wrote for the whole day, and what emerged from that messy draft was basically Frida's whole arc, with the Frida and Harriet story, the whole subplot with her failed marriage, and all the women in pink lab coats, the tech elements. And I think what helped me turn this into something bigger was that the voice was there from the very beginning, this very detached, deadpan, clinical voice. So it's something that I really hope will happen again with sitting down and coming up with book ideas. But it's really the only time in my life where an idea has emerged fully formed. But it definitely took a lot of toil to turn that into something that other people could read with chapters.
No, I'm glad. It's so heartening to hear that can happen, that miraculous novel things can happen. You had mentioned writing short stories. Did you have aspirations to write a novel? Did you ever think you would write a novel? Or did you think that, oh, maybe I'm just a short story writer, or maybe I'm just going to write, we were talking earlier, your little like lyric, non-story prose poem things. Or were you kind of like, well, I'm getting, I'm in my 30s. Should I have a kid or not? Should I write a novel or not? I just asked that question because I feel like I never really had aspirations to write a novel. And then I kind of got an idea and I was like, oh, this is for a novel, right? And I had never really attempted to write a novel before. So have you ever attempted other longer projects?
I have somewhere in my parents' basement, I have probably 100 pages of a completely plotless circular project where I think it's about a birth cult where all the women are named Alice.
Ooh.
About a mysterious preacher. And it's kind of like the end times, but it also kind of makes no sense. And
it sounds really good though.
it sounds really good for about 3 sentences, but I can assure you that it's just pages of just this mess. So I think I had aspirations to write. I always have had aspirations to write a novel, but it took a really long time to combine those aspirations with a story. And take whatever skills I was learning as a short story writer and apply them to something that was going to be worth many years of my life. And I think I really admire the people who are able to say, I'm going to write a novel now, and like just approach it with so much confidence, because it definitely took me a long time to even get up the confidence to work on a much longer project.
Yeah, I mean, it's like taking a plunge, right? You're like, this is going to be the next 5 years of my life, if all goes well.
Right.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about the process of writing and keeping track of a large cast of characters? Again, I was just so impressed that not only are you keeping track of this long timeline, right? I think it's, what is it? Is it 2 years?
I think it covers a little bit over a year.
Over a year.
I have to give a shout out to my copy editor, Erica, who was the total genius who made an actual calendar during
yes.
the copy editing process, because there's this ticking clock element of the book, but it turns out I was always having the clock tick wrong, and then Erica fixed it so that I was referring to the correct amount of time.
What a gift. I will also thank Erica. That's amazing. So it has this great ticking clock, which is just like pulling you through the book and is so expertly done. And then I was just like, she's just doing all the hard things and making it look so effortless. Then you also have this huge cast of characters, which you keep track of. You have to decide who's going to kind of step out and be like a bigger character and who's going to kind of, be more of like a chorus character. Could you talk a little bit about how you like worked your way through that, and what it was like to have that many characters that you could call on in this story?
I definitely didn't go into the project thinking that I would create such a unwieldy challenge for myself.
It didn't feel unwieldy at all, and I feel like it could have gotten so unwieldy, but just like you did it so well, Jasmine. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. I wish I could hand you a piece of cake through the I think with the character, the whole cast that I created, this is definitely a much more macro project. Like all my short stories, like probably why I needed to like break into something bigger. Was a lot of my short stories were about couples, and it was just two people being unhappy over and over and over again. And so here there's a much bigger cast, and there were actually even more characters, like even more moms in Frida's class. And my original editor, Dawn Davis, said there's just too many people, like we can't tell them apart. You need to make the characters you have more distinctive. I think when you mentioned some of the things we might talk about tonight, when I didn't actually work from an outline. I really should have. I highly recommend other people work from outlines, because the way I went about things was very much trial and error. So the master documents I had on hand were a character list. It's like just to keep track of all the names. And then also the outline I did have was just the curriculum of the school, like the lessons. I came up with the weird lesson names and the different units of study way back in spring 2015, like when I was writing the first draft. And it turned out to be so complicated to come up with the curriculum that as I revised, I just stuck with the original timeline, because I just came up with story elements that would go with the curriculum. And then once I created that, I couldn't undo it, because it made everything else crumble. So I just decided to just go with it. So amazingly, that original sequence has stuck with it through the finished book. But it's partly because once I made it, I didn't know how to redo it.
Well, I also thought the curriculum had this amazing narrative threat. Like it got more and more intense as we went through, until you're at the end and the mothers are actually being like beat up as part of the curriculum. It was, it goes off the rails in the best way possible, the deeper in that you get. There's also this element of the dolls, which I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying there are some dolls involved in this book. And when I got to that point in the book, I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know it was going to be this kind of book, because it shifted a little closer. I mean, it's obviously not like a sci-fi book or anything, but it's edging a little closer to genre, edging toward, dystopia, edging into a world that's not quite ours, but is very close. Were the dolls something that like came to you in that first kind of rush of inspiration, or was that something that you found as you moved into it?
So the way the school was structured, the idea that the moms would be working with children who were not their own, and the idea of the dolls was from that very first writing day.
Yeah, it would have had to have been, right? Because it's like so central. Yeah.
And I am not quite sure exactly where it came from, but I mean, children can be very spooky. so there's that. But I think in the original New Yorker piece, one thing that struck me was the way that they talked about parenting was so clinical that it felt almost like science fiction, because they were talking about it in this very exact way, as if there was one set of standards. And I think something about it just made me think of 1984 and all the mental conditioning and reprogramming. So it wasn't like I had that article and thought, what a great idea. But it's something about it. I was just so angry on that mother's behalf, and something about it just stayed with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to throw in one question that I think goes in really well from Ellen Moscow, who writes, were there any funny or weird things that you revised once you had a kid of your own because you realized they were unrealistic, or you added something in that was more realistic once you had a kid of your own?
Well, I can tell you that I did not have any sense of scale, like of the size of babies and toddlers or their language acquisition. So in the very first draft, I had the moms bathing the toddler dolls in sinks, because I had no idea how big a child of that age was. And I had the toddlers speaking in full paragraphs. Like Frida and Harriet had really, really long, detailed, paragraph at a time conversations because I had no clue about the stage of development. But I think what also changed was the lessons got a lot less complicated. Like in the original version, I had the moms running through actual fire and escaping from actual burning buildings. And it turned out that that really was not necessary for getting my point across. So once I had my daughter and I was watching her grow up and like seeing what was hard about parenting, I definitely wrote that into the book because I just didn't know that getting dressed is really hard, or leaving the house is really hard, or getting them to eat and not drop food on the floor.
Yeah, it's not like you're like teaching them like Olympic sports or something. And it's just
Right.
like, have your breakfast. Yeah, absolutely. So I read in an Entertainment Weekly interview you did already that you cut hundreds of pages from the original draft. What went away? Is there a whole nother book out there that maybe would come out of those pages? Or can you talk a little bit about the cuts and how you knew what wasn't part of the book?
Well, I can tell you that there might be several other books worth of bad ideas. That there might be several other books in those discarded pages, but I can't promise that it would be any good. I definitely am a writer who needs to make the big mess and then cut, because I mean, I definitely came to writing as someone who wanted to be a book editor. Like I was always really interested in editing, and all my jobs in my life have been as an editor, and I just really like cutting things. So if I don't write longhand, I'll end up with like negative sentences. Like I will write for 20 pages and then cut it to 5 words. So I have to work longhand and just have a big baggy messy draft and then shape it. So if there's any effortless feeling, which thank you very much for saying that, if there's any feeling of effortlessness or if the pacing works, it's all in the editing and the cutting, because the original version was definitely a big wobbly mess.
Yeah. What a gift. I feel like I'm so bad to a certain degree at editing that I just have to like, I think a lot before I write and kind of like think things through, sometimes very, very much to my own detriment. And so, what a gift to be able to like go back and see the gems and sort of like cut out all the excess stuff. Someone else, Teresa McLean, has a question. Did you do research on what the courts actually have moms go through whose kids are in the system, like classes wise, when you were putting the school together at any point in the book, in the writing?
No, I probably did things a little bit backwards, because I think I had almost all the first draft by the time I started doing research. And I think the research that I did was mostly to inform the revision and see if I was on the right track. And so in real life, there are parenting classes where parents are sent to court mandated parenting classes where they learn things like anger management or how to communicate with their child, and their progress determines whether or not they get custody back. And what I did was basically take something in real life and make it very insane, and also take a long drawn out process and cut out a lot of steps. So there isn't just one court date or only 3 supervised visits, but my initial draft was much too long and had a lot, like months of supervised visits, many court hearings. But it turned out to be so repetitive that my wonderful friend Lydia Conklin, whose work I love, said that when you are working on a novel, you can have the thing that needs to change happen just once instead of happening 25 times. And so that informed a lot of decisions. But some of the research I did was I read a lot of books about American parenting culture, which I can tell you is a very strange thing to do when you're thinking of having a baby. And so I was reading the books about like, super intense, stressed out American parents while I was pregnant, and that was very weird. And so I also read a little bit about the foster care system, and I read a little bit about the different trends in the law and in family courts, and like the different tendencies in states or eras to err on the side of caution or to err on the side of reuniting families. There are very specific legal terms that go with each movement that are not coming to mind right now. But basically what I did was I read just enough to make up something. So it wasn't, it definitely wasn't me taking notes and then building it into the book. It was more me getting a sense of things and then going off in another direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it just strikes me, I mean, the whole, not only like our culture and what happens to parents and the relationship with like parenting and the legal system, but then also in your book, it just seemed like there was something to be said about how the family, or how the way that our culture is set up to like support families, to support single parents, it's just obviously a huge failure, right? That if like a mom has one very bad day, it sets off this like horrible, like dystopian, year-long institutionalization, right? That like dehumanizes her and like, and is really like focused on making her like believe she is a bad mom, and she's trying to get better, you know, like, and so I was just thinking about that a lot. Like, as you were writing this, I mean, were you kind of wanting to sort of like have it be this like comment on how we're set up as a society? Like, I mean, did you sort of have those whispers of like, this is in a certain regard sort of, you know, has a bit of like an activist undercurrent to it? I know like it's not like on the surface activists perhaps in any way, but like, were you kind of thinking about these like larger like issues that are really up for everyone now, I think, in terms of like the modern family and the ways that it's succeeding and failing, especially during a pandemic?
I think when I started out in 2014 and 2015, putting the first draft together, it was a very different world politically. And initially it probably felt much more dystopian, but today reads as much more plausible and realistic. So I actually pared back some of the world building as the last 6 years happened, because suddenly having this crazy government organization that was very chaotically put together and oppressed people in wild ways was just something that happened all the time.
Wow.
So I decided not to write current events into the book because I didn't want to date it, and I just didn't want to put it into my book because I wanted my book to be my special place that I was like, I just didn't want to I didn't want to have current politics in my book too. Sure. You know, it's a great question about whether there was an activist undercurrent. In an ideal world, I would love to say yes, but I think a lot of it was me working out my personal feelings about motherhood and society, and feeling like it's so unfair and so judgmental and oppressive. And so it came from a very personal inquiry. So I think it's the fact that it's coming out right now when women's rights are disappearing is something that I couldn't have anticipated. So So the timeliness of it is partly the moment that it's being published in.
Yeah. I mean, it really does seem like there is a moment, doesn't it? We were talking about, or you mentioned you watched The Lost Daughter recently. Right. And there have been, I mean, my book is also dealing with similar stuff. And I mean, there's so much coming out in terms of film and books right now. And women, I think, really wanting to re-examine and question all of these, you know, messages we've been giving about motherhood and about womanhood. And I certainly did too. You know, I waited until I was in my 30s to have a child, my late 30s. And it did seem like it was problematic in that it was immediately at odds with like this career, this dream that I had had, you know, for since we were together at Breadloaf in our 20s in the cherry cabin, where we first met like 13 years ago, right? We've both been writing for all this time. And then our first books are both, you know, kind of about the problem of motherhood, and, you know, coming at it from different angles. But there's not really a question in there, I don't think. But do you think maybe coming to parenting a bit later, you know, like not having a child in your 20s, gave you a different perspective, or made it kind of more of something that you know, had a personal inquiry into?
Well, I definitely think I didn't treat the decision lightly. Like it wasn't a natural or easy decision. Like I know some people have said like they knew that they wanted to be moms all their lives. I definitely wanted to be an art monster of the Department of Speculation variety, and definitely swore for all of my 20s and most of my early 30s that I was never going to have children. And after meeting my husband, I wanted to have a child with him. So it was very much a decision born out of that relationship, but one that was a pretty weighty decision for us because it was going to completely change our life as two artists and affect the kind of life we could have. So it also felt like, what am I doing? I need to wait until I have a book done. But I had no idea how long it would take to write a book. So it was a decision where we just decided to leap into the unknown, and happily things worked out. But it was a hard decision. And I think I talk about it now because it just feels like there's so little space in our culture for ambivalence of any kind, to even say like I wasn't sure about whether or not to have a child, and it was a hard decision for me. It feels controversial in its own way.
Yeah, I do, but I do feel like I am reading more about it, more about people deciding not to have kids and talking about, you know, I just saw something the other day where it said, you know, most of the people they surveyed weren't going to have kids because of global, like their main concern was global warming, you know, and that was what was deterring them. And I'm like, wow, we're in a really different world than even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and a really different like climate thought wise. And people are putting a lot more consideration, I think, into, you know, starting families.
Let me just tell you a funny story here. So sorry to interrupt you. So it'll be worth it, I promise. So we spent so much time talking about climate change in relation to having a child. And my husband would constantly bring up the melting of Greenland, discussing how can we bring a child into the world when Greenland is disappearing. So it was definitely a conversation in our household too.
Yeah, it was in ours as well. But hormones won out in the end, as they often do. There are people with more questions, so I'd love to get to those. Meredith says, do you feel like Frida's bad day is more relatable now that parents in general and mothers in particular have been struggling with the isolation and the familial requirements including remote schooling as a result of the pandemic.
So the question is it more relatable now?
Frida's bad day. Do you think there's going to be more sympathy perhaps from your readership for Frida's bad day than perhaps when you started writing it?
I think I'm going to quote Lydia Kiesling in an article about The Lost Daughter, which I just read. So I watched the movie quickly just to be able to read her essay, which was so brilliant and was talking about portrayals of motherhood in films. And she talked about how more films are capturing the scream rising in the throat and that feeling of burnout and panic. And a friend of mine last year, my friend Hillary, who I love dearly, and she said that when the book comes out in 2022 during the pandemic, it's likely going to strike a chord because a lot of moms feel like abandoning and not doing what Frida did, but having a break. Just saying, I need a break, I need to be alone now. So I do think the pandemic has created a uniquely terrible situation for parents where everything is precarious all the time, and there's a sense of danger and stress that I was just telling someone the other day that I miss regular parenting, like the regular parenting stress rather than the current.
Yes.
Like the constant just global disaster type stress. So
yeah.
So I think that it does cast Frida's decision. I think what she did is clearly bad, and a great many parents would think, oh wow, that's just over the edge. But I think that it does, the current stress parents are under is casts at Frida's bad day in a different light, because I think right now the pressure is just so unrelenting and constantly changing that, I mean, I don't know what I would do if I was a single parent. Like when my daughter had to quarantine all of a sudden in December, like I was not able to drop everything, but my husband dropped everything. And I just don't know. I just don't know how I would be able to keep it together if I was a single parent. So I am completely in awe of those that do.
Yeah. I after my book came out, someone did write me, and they were talking about how they fantasize about the days after they gave birth when they were in the hospital, and people would just bring them whatever they wanted, and how it's their fantasy to be able to just go to the hospital again. They really wish they were in the hospital. And I was like, yeah, like I feel, I hear what you are saying. There is like, it was just like a mother, like who was just completely had nothing left to give and was like, I would just like to go to the hospital now, which is like a whole nother level of burnout. I also wanted to add that Bonnie Withers has added that she is 80 years old, and the question about whether to bring a child into the world has been present all her adult life. So maybe we're just another iteration of this ongoing, dilemma about, whether it's ethical to bring children into the world the way it is. Rachel Krantz asks, or comments, I can only imagine how difficult balancing motherhood and writing is. I'm wondering how working on a book that is so much about imperfect mothers, AKA real mothers, helped you explore any tension you might have felt between motherhood and writing.
Honestly, the book became a home for all of my stress and worry. So I don't think anyone who knows me would describe me as relaxed, but I think that I was a tiny bit more relaxed as a parent because I had somewhere for all my panic to go. And I think that writing about imperfect moms and writing about some of the problems in the culture generally, and like trying to wrestle with it in fiction, definitely made me think more about the way I was judging myself and feeling like a failure, feeling shame. And I mean, it did also impact my parenting in weird ways. Like there was one time when we were getting our preschool age daughter in the before times ready for school. And she was probably a little over 2. And we were getting all the stuff together for all the stuff you need to carry to preschool. And she slipped out the door and got really far down the block by herself. And I chased after her, got her. But when stuff like that would happen, that were just honest mistakes, and then you rescue them, I would think, oh my God, I would get hauled away. Like I would get sent to the school. So it was also a funny voice in my head to think about, oh, this is the way I would be policed. Or if she was having a tantrum on the sidewalk and not getting into her stroller and we were just stuck there, and I could feel the eyes of the neighborhood as she continued screaming and I continued raising my voice and getting nowhere. I could feel the judgment. And I think that hopefully in the world that I've created, that there's a way in which I made the judgment literal with the women in pink lab coats and all the monitoring and the surveillance, as a way to talk about the constant pressure that parents are under. So I don't actually know what I would have done if I was a young mom, like a brand new mom working on a project that wasn't about this particular thing, because so much of the experience of her first years of life were just woven into the book. So I still haven't put together her baby photo album, and she just turned 5, and I still haven't put together the album of year 1, but instead I wrote her into a dystopian novel and to have like tons of developmental milestones and like special sayings she had, and like so I can hand her this quite dark book, but I still have the photo album done.
Beautiful. I mean, that's a beautiful time capsule and gift. Absolutely. I also just want to add that as I was reading your book, I found it really to be this exercise in empathy. You know, there was that article about how reading fiction makes you a more empathetic person. And I found myself with each of the mothers, you know, like I couldn't really help but sort of like fully imagine the situation. You know, you would kind of give us a line about why they were there and who they were. And I found myself just like imagining my way into all of them, right? And just developing huge empathy for all of them, huge compassion. Even if what they did, you know, was perhaps unforgivable. It was just a really wonderful reading experience in that way. So thank you for that. Grace Eichmeyer has a wonderful question. She says, you mentioned how important it was to you to have a flawed Asian character. Do you think there's something also shifting about how Asians and Asian Americans are being portrayed culturally? And is there something specific you are trying to say about model minority expectations that are distinct from general pressures on mothers or parents?
I do think that there is a shift in Asian American representation. I mean, there's just simply a lot more of it. I mean, when I was growing up, I think one reason that I didn't start writing fiction earlier was that there was just Amy Tan and Maxine Hong Kingston, and that's it. So it's quite hard to envision a path when you don't see anyone who looks like you doing it, and they're icons. So it's not like you could think, I'm gonna be the next Amy Tan. It's so doable. And so I think something is changing in having a lot more Asian American writers with different narratives. So, and then having space for that, and even books that I'm publishing with on January 4th, like Brown Girls and Fiona and Jane, like that's really exciting that there's so many of us debuting this year, because when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, like there was no such thing. I mean, even seeing Asians on the cover of magazines, there was no such thing. And so I think that, can you repeat the second half of the question, please?
Oh no, it disappeared.
I think it was about the model minority.
It was like commenting on, you know, because you said you really wanted to have like a flawed Asian American character. Is that somehow you want like commenting on the model minority um, stereotype that we get, or specifically wanting to have an Asian American character who was flawed?
Well, I think I wanted there to be space for an Asian American heroine who was really selfish and complicated and desirous, but also loving and vulnerable, and just really having space to be human in that way. Because one thing that really irks me in fiction is when the characters of color are really noble, like they're where they serve a purpose in the book to sort of prop up the white lead, and which is also in movies and TV too. But that always has bothered me because there's just no room to play. I mean, like when we were talking about The Lost Daughter, I was telling my husband, like, there are so many great parts in that movie for white actors, but can you imagine a movie like that being made with like an all Asian cast, for instance? Like, I don't know how many more years we're gonna have to wait for a project like that. But I think I was interested in working through some of my own feelings growing up as a first generation Chinese American daughter, and like growing up in mostly white communities and always feeling like an outsider in pretty much every room I've been in for a lot of my life. And so I definitely had space through Frida's character to explore some of that. But I think I wanted to write the character that I always wanted to see on the page. So some of it was just my desire to have a character like this exist, because certainly there have been some really flawed, complicated Chinese American characters in fiction, but I wanted her to have the full range of life available to her, and have room to make mistakes.
Yes. Yeah, because that's what you want for yourself. That's what readers want, like that's what readers want to find when they turn to a work of fiction. And I can relate with that urge too. My mother was a white mother, but I really felt like I wanted to write against the idea of the saintly mother, or like even the noble mother, like this picture we have of a perfect, domesticated, saintly woman that felt really important to just absolutely blow apart and have someone. I was not as subtle and elegant as you were. I had to like turn her into a dog. So I am, and I did want to ask you this. What do you think? Because we keep joking, like, wouldn't it be great if Frida and Nightbitch could like hang out? What do you think they would do? I was thinking about this today. Like, if our characters got together, what would those ladies get up to? Do you think? Would it be a fun time? It certainly would be. There would be some problems, maybe.
I hope that they would be friends. I imagine that they would be friends. It might take them a little bit of time to warm up to each other.
I think so too.
It really also depends on the state of the pandemic, whether they go to a restaurant and eat indoors. I hope they would eat delicious food together.
Yeah.
And that they had childcare during the time of their hangout so that they could be alone together.
Also important that, their children were not home alone. I was thinking that because Frida seems a little bit more reserved perhaps than Nightbitch. So maybe Nightbitch would like help Frida like go out and do some like crazy running around in the night. And then Frida could maybe, I feel like she could like help Nightbitch like chill a little bit, like get it together a little bit.
I like that vision.
Yeah. Thanks.
But I just hope that they would get to eat.
Yeah, I agree. Let me see here. People have questions. Someone says, I feel like there may be a sequel here. Have you ever considered that at all? On the day after your book comes out, have you considered a sequel yet?
You know, the funny thing was when we were in the process of selling film rights, I was frequently asked about a sequel. And one of my mom's best friend, my godmother, when I was telling her I don't know what to work on next, she said, well, just read the last 10 pages of your book and then start there.
That's actually a great idea.
Unfortunately, I feel like I might have tapped out my resources and vision with this one book.
Sure.
But the film option that we sold is to potentially develop it as an ongoing TV series. So there will be hopefully a story where Frida gets to carry on, but in some fashion, which has not yet been determined. But if there is a sequel of any kind, I think it would be in the potential TV adaptation.
Yeah. Okay. One, I would love that because it ends just, the ending is magnificent. It's wonderful. And I think does open it up for further development. Congratulations on selling
Thank you.
film and TV rights. So many exciting things have been announced in the last couple of days. This is going to be turned into a series. You also are Read with Jenna pick for this month. You also got that great New York Times group text shout out.
We did not know that was coming, and I still don't actually believe that it happened. Like I understand it's on the internet, so therefore it happened.
It is. It's real.
But it's just so bonkers, and it's I staged a surprise for my parents, which I actually still have to ask them if it's okay to put it on social media, but we staged a surprise for them. So I kept the Read with Jenna secret since last April, which was a long time to keep a secret.
Gosh, yeah.
And so the only people who knew were my husband, my therapist, and my psychiatrist. And so they talked with me about it a lot, but my parents didn't know. So we corralled everyone to watch TV together yesterday morning, very, very early. And so we have a reaction, a funny reaction.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, hopefully you can share that. That's so sweet too that you saved it for them and had them there. So the TV series is already kind of going, right? How are you involved in that process? Do you get to kind of like sit in on the development of it? I'm sure people are interested to know about your Hollywood connections and what has happened there.
It's totally thrilling. I'm signed on as an executive producer, and mostly my role has been watching and learning, because certainly making a TV show is not in my skill set at the moment. So I can chime in with an occasional useful idea, but I think I'm mostly cheering on the wonderful people I'm working with. Yeah. It's really fascinating to learn. I certainly am coming to the project as a fan.
Yeah. Oh, cool. That's really exciting. And I am just totally along for the ride. Congratulations. What an incredible debut. I hope that amidst all of the hoopla, you are able to like really feel it and really enjoy it. It might be impossible to do that. But yeah, I loved this book. I hope everyone who's here, if you haven't already bought it, I really hope you'll buy a copy or two and support Jasmine. And you'll be hearing so much more about this in months and years to come.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Powell's, for hosting.
Thank you so much. This is the book. I just put a link to it in the chat. You can click on that and buy it from us. Rachel's wonderful book here as well, Nightbitch. Rachel, Jasmine, it's so great to hear you guys talk about the books and about mothers and everything else. What a wonderful event this was. Everyone at home, thank you for tuning in as well. And also, I'm going to paste a link into our YouTube channel. This event will be showing up on our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow. So if you know people who've missed it and would like to share it with them, please go to our YouTube page and follow us there. And you can share this event with others when it goes up there tomorrow. So Rachel, Jasmine, again, really great to see you and hear you talk about the books. And everyone else, have a great night.
Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. Congrats.
Bye.
Night.